This week on Thought Rock Live, we have Mark Latham. He's presenting on IT outsourcing trends in 2012. Is outsourcing still considered to be a bad word? Mark's 25 plus years of experience in information technology has enabled him to consolidate and re-engineer more than 300 IT support operations. He's been responsible for organizations with more than 330,000 internal customers. Mark worked for UPS for 17 plus years, building efficiencies in operations and information technology. His expertise with process improvement and re-engineering has allowed organizations to launch new services within weeks, and his ability to create strategic alliances with customers and business partners has led to the 20 times growth of services in business process outsourcing arena. Mark's leadership in putting together support for United Health Group and others has produced scalability capable of keeping pace with a one-year increase in customer base from 900 users to 2 million users. Mark has a Bachelor of Science degree in computer science from the University of Central Florida, and for the last 10 years, Mark has helped build an entrepreneurial IT sourcing organization from $0 to $80 million in revenue before selling that to an Indian company. With this and other startups, he has developed keen entrepreneurial skills and valuable sales and marketing expertise. So welcome, Mark. We're looking forward to your presentation. I will turn everything over to you.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you for having me on Thought Rock. I think this subject is often questions from people a lot about whether they should outsource or not. And for me, from a typical consultant viewpoint, is whether consulting is a bad word or not. I think the answer always is it depends, and it really depends on who's asking. But if we go to the next slide and just think about technology and what we are outsourcing and things, what is technology's impact on our world? And to me, I talk to people on a daily basis, as does everybody probably on the phone call. Just simple things. You have the whole gamut and range of people that might like Twitter, might not like Twitter, might like Facebook, might not like Facebook, use YouTube, don't use YouTube. It ranges the gamut on whether it has an impact for you or doesn't have an impact for you, and I think it really depends on how you want to use it and how you use technology as a tool to do something else. But to me, from a business perspective, just take Twitter for an example. The technology of Twitter, as simple as it may sound, but to me, instead of using it for, okay, I'm getting coffee in the morning and letting all my friends know, I think it can be used as marketing. Matter of fact, you see on this graph, you see how it was used to really, I would say, start a revolution. Over in Cairo, they were bringing up people, trying to get everybody to have mass meetings, and it was so effective that the government had to shut it off. So to me, that is a huge example of how a small piece of technology that a lot of people think is really irrelevant, especially some of the older generation, and how it can be used as a tool to make something very effective. Okay, so again, technology's impact on our world, it's just huge, and it can be cut off depending on who's using it and how they want to use it. So is technology the only thing that's changing? I don't think so. I think it's the workers too. Time Magazine had a huge article on it, but to me, some of the factors are the things that surprised me would be over the last 20 years that college graduates now hold an average of over 14 jobs by the time they're 38, whereas probably in the 80s and 90s they might have only held 5 jobs. So to me, huge change there. What causes some of that? Could be location, community. A lot of people are worried about carbon footprints now, community-minded folks. But to me, again, huge change from where it was before. So it's not just technology, it's also people. We talked about over 40% of workers will be contractors by 2016. A big change from earlier, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of the bigger reasons and more notable reasons are people just want to be like Gates and Zuckerberg and start their own business, maybe start out as a contractor and go from there. But also, the huge change would be the 71 million baby boomers exiting the workforce now. So to me, companies, you're thinking about the lifelong employment. people don't really think about that anymore. And the baby boomers that are leaving and all the new people are coming in, really just a different thought process. Okay, so how does this affect outsourcing?
Mark, we have a couple of questions here.
Okay.
While I pose them, I forgot to mention to those of you who are listening and participating, if you would like to ask questions during the presentation of Mark, you do have on your control panel a questions box. Just type them in there, and I will pause with Mark at an appropriate point in time and feed that question. So the first question we have here is, you mentioned one reason for 40% of the workers becoming contractors. Do you see other reasons?
Yeah, good question. I think the reasons, this has been through many surveys. I've had my own surveys. As I go into organizations, I'm always asking. I've talked with HR companies and HR businesses. But the reasons are really anything from as simple as I want to work from home, I can't spend time commuting, I want to have a virtual work office, to maybe something a little bit more complicated and meaningful, that they want to be more autonomous and pick their own work and have their own type of customers and companies. Sometimes they even think that companies, because of M&A, mergers and acquisitions, that they get bought up too fast and they change too fast, and they don't want to be caught up in that, and they'd rather just have their own. So again, you know, people change a little bit. They don't believe in company pensions as much. They don't believe in company benefits as much, and time off. They really want to make their own way, be themselves, and really have the best work-life balance they can.
Great, thanks, Mark. We did have one other question on that slide, actually. Do you think the 71 million boomers leaving is a good thing or a bad thing?
Again, consultant answer, it probably depends on who's asking the question. But to explain it a little bit, I think younger workers would have, if while baby boomers are leaving, I think obviously that leaves an opening for younger workers. They would have an opportunity for more work. But on the other hand, they only have that opportunity if they have the skills and the knowledge base. So to me, before the baby boomers leave, I think the new workers, the up-and-coming workers, really have to figure out how they can get that knowledge that the baby boomers are leaving with to them. So not everything. A lot of people now, you know, if you ask them a question, they have their phone with them, they Google it. Everybody Googles it rather than asking the person next to them or something. So to me, asking some of the more experienced people that have been in the business a long time already, trying to get that IP, that intellectual property, from them into the new users is very important. So is it a good thing or bad thing? Again, it really depends, but I think the new people do have an opportunity, but only if they get that intellectual property from the people that are leaving. That it? Okay.
Yep, carry on.
Okay, so how does all this stuff really affect outsourcing, and what changes do outsourcers face? One of just a real quick snippet on maybe some of the things that outsourcers face would just be technology in general. So here's an item from February where it says vendors shipped 488 million smartphones compared to 450 million PCs. So again, the mobile technology is taking over. How does that change? You're wondering how that changes outsourcing? Well, to me, each piece of technology changes outsourcing a little bit. So this one just means there's a huge change in application development. Everybody was making and developing applications for PCs, and now they have to develop, whether it be different websites or different applications or what have you, for the mobile user and how those work, whether it be bandwidth utilizations and whatever. So to me, outsourcers have to adapt, and as long as they adapt, they'll be okay. If they don't adapt and don't change with the new technology changes and such, I think they'll just end up going away. So the people and companies, I think the technology changes and the people and the way companies work change. So to me, this really just means services that you have and need, they need to change as well as the technology does. Okay. I think some of the
I have another question here, Mark. What other technology Oh, sorry, a little
Go
pause
ahead.
there. There was a question here. What other technology and people changes do you see for outsourcers?
Well, I think there's hundreds. I'll name a couple of big ones that are probably high on the list for CIOs. And to me, from a technology perspective, that might be cloud technology. So different outsourcers may be trying to figure out how they can use cloud technology to outsource your entire infrastructure, for instance. Whereas back in the day, they may not have been doing that because everybody was building their own. But now it could be cheaper to have it outsourced, have the entire cloud outsourced. So virtualization might be another one. So instead of having different boxes do everything, you can have virtual boxes, less equipment, more high-powered equipment, but less equipment, and that can change. And to me, one of the big ones is the WAN, the wide area network optimization, trying to figure out how to get all of your application data, all of your voice data, voice and data application needs all across the internet and have it be at really local area network speeds. From a people standpoint, I think people specialization has become a lot more narrow and even changes a lot more quickly than it used to. I think the world economies have changed. If you look at India, their pay rates are probably have gone up in the maybe 15% in the last year or so, whereas with the U.S. economy, depending on where you are, some of the wages have almost come down maybe 1% to 2%. So you have economy changes, and everybody that used to be looking for just cost changes in outsourcing, there's different economies of scale now that have changed those decisions. Hope that answered the question. Okay, so the latest outsourcing trends we wanted to talk about. Some of these are, they may not be as obvious as you would think. So if there are questions about these, please let me know. So smaller outsourcing deals will change suppliers more often. Just about everything you see from Gartner or Forrester or even talking with IBM and Accenture and those types of large outsourcing firms, the larger outsourcing deals seem to be lessening. I won't say they go away, but they definitely seem to be lessening. As they all turn over, it's one of the biggest years for the amount of contracts to end, as we've surveyed a lot of companies. So as contracts are ending, the contracts are being broken up into smaller, as we see a little bit later, but they're smaller contracts. They're more pinpointed services. But again, the larger outsourcing deals, it's probably going to become more rare to see a firm outsource everything, all IT, to one organization. From a risk standpoint, from a service standpoint, and from a intellectual standpoint, it just doesn't happen anymore. Okay, so convenience sourcing, raising suppliers' margins. To me, if you look at the, we get into a slide a little bit later about gross margins, but the larger players, and we may even have some of them on the phone, seem to be getting a lot higher margins because they're able to create niches in the market for organizations that need fast outsourcing, short outsourcing for projects. So for instance, somebody maybe has through a merger and acquisition, they have a new company coming on and they need to deploy all new pieces of equipment to all their offices for the new folks, or a change of equipment. So they may outsource that. And to me, that provides a high amount of value. You have experts come in, change everything over quickly, but again, it raises the margins because it's for the suppliers, because it's very quick, and it helps the buyers out because they aren't able to do it themselves, and it's only a one-time thing. So again, outsourcing short projects is a new change. Rather than making it a long, drawn-out process, they need it quickly because they need a product to market or something like that. And then what to me was really surprising in the surveys that I've seen is the decline in outsourcing obligations and liabilities. Contracts seem to be more commoditized, and because they're a little bit smaller, they aren't huge overarching, encompassing items that the measures and remedies for poor performance aren't there anymore. So seeing this trend, it kind of scared me a little bit, but you just want to know what the predictions are for the future if we start lessening the obligations, whether it be the buyer lessening the obligations for the supplier or the supplier just not paying attention to the obligations from the buyer. Okay.
Great. All right. We have a couple of comments. I'll sort of read them out. Hope I do this justice, and you can comment on those, and then potentially a question here too.
All right.
So these are coming from Guy. Going back a slide or two, he said, you're correct on outsourcing. IBM and HP themselves are buying companies, IT departments.
Mm-hmm.
And his next comment was, they are not lessening in local government and healthcare. I would assume that he means outsourcing deals. And in large outsourced deals right now, there's an increase with insourcing. So I'm not sure if you want to comment on any of those comments or not.
Okay. Well, it sounds like being said that they're, instead of outsourcing, that they might be buying a service, and then since it's part of their organization, they're now calling it insourcing. Okay. However you want to use the terms, really it sounds like a company is buying a service that has an expertise that can provide a service to the customers at the right place, at the right time, at the right cost, and so therefore it becomes a good acquisition. And to me, I'd be all over it. To me, that's good business. If you can buy something and then or outsource it to an organization that can do it better, faster, and very even possibly cheaper, to me, probably good for you, so you can stay competitive in your core competency.
Great. Okay. Then another comment. So they are moving away from India, going to IBM HP. Is that what you see? Do you see that sort of onshoring?
Yeah, I see. Some people might call that backsourcing, that they've gone offshore and now they're coming back onshore. I see a lot more talk than I see action in that area. People want to do that, or they, at least the media has gotten involved, and the media kind of emphasizes that there's bad service when it's offshore service. I wouldn't say that's necessarily the case. Global companies, you could probably talk to GE, you could probably talk to Alcoa, you could probably talk to IBM and HP and many others. If you're a global company, I can't imagine you thinking that your India department is so terrible that you can't have services provided from India to the United States. So I really think it depends on how the people are trained, what capabilities, what language capabilities they have, and what cultural capabilities they have. As long as those are all there, I think you should be able to provide a service. So people still want a cost savings. I think if they're just going offshore for cost, I think that has stopped, because I'm not sure the cost savings is there anymore based on what people want, because it's not just the cost of the service. It might be the cost of the customers leaving. It might be the cost of getting new customers, that people are looking at the total cost of ownership when you outsource something offshore versus just the cost of that one service being offshore. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Mark.
Okay. So some of the information from CIO Magazine, I'm sure you guys have read, but a mixed bag of M&A. We talked about it a little bit, but to me it's all over the board. You have acquisitions to help IT, you have acquisitions to help business, you're selling off to let others do it better. I really can't see any trend on whether people are trying to get rid of, we'll just use technology, IT infrastructure for now, but anybody selling it off as a trend or bringing it in as a trend. I think it really depends on how the business wants to handle it. So outsourcing, buyers are taking it a lot more slowly, I think. It used to be almost a goal to get 80-20. So the 80% you'd be outsourced and 20% would be kept in-house. Again, we'll see a slide in a little bit on what's important to CIOs, and just hitting that metrics, not one of those important items for the CIOs to think about. One of the most important items is how do we attract and retain customers. So we'll be talking about that later, but that's why everybody's taking it a little bit more slowly. Is outsourcing best for this service at this time with our current customer base? The cloud coming down to earth. I think for many companies, it used to be that the cloud was just that, something in the cloud. It was kind of a black box nobody knew about. It's almost becoming commoditized now. You could build your own cloud if you wanted to, and get that done fairly cheaply with not a lot of expense or not a lot of expertise. Now, if you want to make that cloud extremely flexible for your growing business, I think that may give you different questions to ask and still be able to outsource it rather than buy it yourself. So service buyers looking beyond labor arbitrage, and that's what I was just talking about earlier. That we're, again, because we were looking at that 80-20 rule over the last couple of years, we were doing a lot of offshoring, which then drove up the rates of offshoring, which now makes it a little bit different. If the rates are going up over there and coming down in other places, labor arbitrage is not the main reason to outsource. We talked about the deals getting smaller. We talked about the backsourcing. And to me, one of the big ones was application. If we look down at the bottom of the list, the application development coming back stateside. And to me, that's for speed. It used to be almost a marketing advantage to have 24/7. You have development offshore and around the world, so you can just move development from time zone to time zone to time zone. But what I think most people have found is that while it sounded good, it still didn't give the best speed to market for an application. There was communication gaps. There was issues with moving it from place to place. We thought code was commoditized, and I'm not sure that it is. And innovation surely is not commoditized. So all those things, if we can get all of that put together in one spot and communicate effectively, I think you can get a better speed to market. So if you're a U.S. company, it might be better to have it U.S. If you're a European company, it might be better to have it local to Europe. So because of these trends, I think especially the deals getting smaller, the service providers and account managers not being there, and even IT outsourcers embracing riskier models, I think that gross margins are far better than they ever used to be for outsourcers, which helps the outsourcers and, in turn, helps the buyers, as we'll talk about in a second. And we may even have some of these folks on the phone, whether it be IBM or Accenture. So, again, these are surveys done from different organizations. But it's not the commodity that it used to be. And as we look into those smaller project-oriented outsourcing deals, I think we see that the margins go up. So rather than a 10 or 20% margin, now we're looking in the high 20s and even in the 40s for these groups, which then allow them to invest back into their organization to be better outsourcers so they can be the experts at what they do. How many times have people tried to outsource something and they just outsourced it for labor, whereas there was no R&D being done, there was no innovation being done, and they were just doing it for labor, and they had to train, the buyer had to train the seller, all those types of things. So I think with margins like this, it's still a little bit better for everyone. So what does this mean for buyers in general? If we look at this, outsourcing isn't as structured and formal as it used to be. You used to look at the contracts, and they'd be, minimum of 70 pages talking about everything from what people could say, what people could wear, when the data had to be backed up, all those types of things. There's a lot fewer barriers now, especially with the smaller size in deals, and more options. So the next thing that it means for buyers is don't be afraid to only source some of your business. Okay, and again, you can source what needs to be sourced. If it's better to be sourced, then source it. It's not one of those things where you should source everything, outsource everything in IT. You should just source what needs to be sourced. If you have the expertise in-house, keep it in-house. The problem is that people have been outsourcing things. The intellectual property goes when they outsource it, and if they bring it back in-house, the intellectual property is not there, and then it's a nightmare to bring back in-house. So just be aware of those things. And the last one is, a little play on words, but back, front, sideways sourcing, back sourcing, whatever the case is, really only source relevant components. Okay, so you really want to ask yourself many questions about what you want to source, but I think the biggest thing is making sure that it helps you and helps your customers.
Hey, Mark, we have another question here.
Okay.
This one from James. It's if you were going to outsource, what type of questions would you ask yourself before doing that?
Well, it's a good question. There's many questions I would probably ask myself, but I think as we see even on this next slide, we'll be looking at the first thing to me is how it affects the customers. Another way of saying that might be how it affects the business. But if you can use sourcing as a tool to gain and retain customers, I think that's what you should be doing. If you need to keep it in-house to gain and retain customers, that's what you should be doing. So can you do it better? Can you do it cheaper? Those are very short-term questions, and those may be part of the answer on will it affect the customer, because if it's cheaper, you might be able to lower the price. But if it's cheaper, there may be a reason for it to be cheaper, that they may not be providing the right data for you to be able to do business intelligence on your customers. There's lots of different things in there that you really need to look at to make sure that it's best for your customers. And to me, that's the scary part, that a lot of organizations are asking IT to be cheaper when, if we even look at this slide that's on the screen now, the CIO should be saying, I can make it cheaper easily. We can just cut out all of IT and that'll be really cheap. But the key is, how can we continue to gain customers or retain customers? And I'd throw it back in the business people's lap, or have my own seat as a CIO on the board and say, listen, let's not worry about how we make it cheaper right now. Let's worry about how we can continue to gain new customers. Hope that answered the question. So we look at this list, and we've talked about a couple of things. And even if you look at the trend from 2008 to 2011, they're ranked in order. The other years, they're kind of all over the board. But one of the items was improving linking. If you look at the very bottom, improving or linking the business IT relationship, it's gone up and down. But even developing or managing a flexible infrastructure has created a #1, and I think that's because everybody wants, all the customers want faster, more usable technology, and I think that's why that's #1. And if we go to the next slide, which are what are the priorities in 2012 versus the ones we just saw from 2008 through 2011, I highlighted the fact that increasing enterprise growth and attracting and retaining new customers is #1 and #2. So how to grow the organization and how to bring in and retain customers are, to me, the two biggest things. And if you go down the rest of the list, it's, how do you reduce cost, how do you improve efficiency, profitability, all those types of things, which are all excellent. But again, the key items that the CIO should be concentrating on, which is what the rest of the business should be concentrating on, is increasing enterprise growth and bringing in new customers. And also, if we look at the technology priorities, again, whatever you're outsourcing, if your priority is analytics and business intelligence, if you start, for instance, outsourcing your call center, you need to make sure that you haven't outsourced that information and haven't lost that information. You're able to use that information to be able to tell you how you can, again, continue to get more customers because of the trends and that information is showing you, or how you can keep your current customers because of the problems that they're having and how you're able to fix them. So again, making sure that you don't outsource the information, you might outsource the service. Okay. So
Excellent.
to me,
Actually, we do have a question here, Mark.
Okay.
Why do you think attracting and retaining customers is high on that 2012 list?
Okay. Well, I have my own personal philosophy as well as I think the surveys, but to me, it's finally happened where the CIO has become a little selfish and said, I want to be on the same playing field as the business people, as the sales and marketing people, as the operations people, and as the finance people. I don't want to be a second-class business person anymore. I want to be at the table with these guys. And in order to be at the table with all of these people talking about the business itself, rather than just talking about infrastructure and technology, they have to be talking about retaining customers. They have to be talking about retaining revenue. They can't just be talking about IT stuff because it will bore the other people to death. And I think that's one of the big reasons. But they have to be business savvy to be able to talk about that stuff and be able to sit at the table. And I think when you're at that table, if somebody thinks that you're not helping build revenue, you're just hurting the situation more. You're either helping build revenue or you're taking away from the revenue. So to me, those are the reasons that really the CIO wants to be a higher level person, and they want to be sitting at the same table on the same playing field as all of the rest of the executives. Hopefully that answered it.
Mark, we have another question. I think
Okay.
it did, yeah. We have another question. It's actually from me.
Okay.
I saw, in the last several years, some surveys and articles on organizations hiring or replacing technical CIOs with business CIOs. Do you see that in your experience? And more to the point of your last comment, do you see those people are actually sitting at the table? Because my experience is we've been talking about that for 15 or 20 years.
Yep.
And it hasn't actually transpired. Do you see that changing?
Yeah. I see it changing extremely slowly. And one of the reasons why I think it changes extremely slowly is because of the attitude of IT people. I hope I don't offend anybody on the call, but usually I've been in several conversations when management will come to IT and say, for instance, okay, I want a new infrastructure. IT will go, no, we can't do that. It costs too much. It gives all the reasons and parameters why we can't do that, rather than saying, well, sure, we can do that. How's it going to help the business? And where are we going to get the resources to be able to do it? Okay, and here's how we're going to be able to do it, and here's how it's going to help. So to me, it's a different methodology and a different mindset that all of IT has to change, not just the CIO. And I think it's changing slowly, but especially when you get down to the, as you go down through the ranks through IT, get closer and closer to either people that are doing coding or people that are actually taking phone calls. It seems a lot easier to say no when somebody asks to do something in IT than it does to say yes. And I would just ask, and I try and preach that wherever I go, that it always should be yes and. Yes, I can do that, and this is what it's going to do, and this is what it's going to cost. But we can do it, not a problem. Did that answer your question, John?
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I can speak for all the IT folks on the call and say I resemble that remark. Yeah,
okay.
Definitely answered my question. It's good to see.
Okay. So I guess, go ahead.
Sorry, no, keep going.
So I guess the question really is outsourcing a bad word? And to sum it up, I believe it's almost impossible to run a business without outsourcing, whether it be outsourcing payroll to ADP, whether it be outsourcing infrastructure to maybe Accenture or Dell or IBM or somebody, or even your help desk calls to a company like Be Virtual. You can't be competitive without outsourcing. I just don't see it. So the question should be not whether you're going to outsource or not, but which processes, if outsourced, would make your services more competitive and allow you to gain new customers. And really, that's it. That's it for me. To me, again, not a bad word. It's just, which services could be more competitive because of outsourcing? That's what you should be asking yourself every day. Okay. Thanks,
Excellent.
John.
Thank you, Mark. We do have a comment or question here from Maureen. I'm interested in the risk and compliance considerations of outsourcing. Currently, at least in Canada, we have heightened awareness around all our third-party relationships and specifically cloud solutions. So once again, what are the risks and compliance considerations with respect to outsourcing?
Okay, well, there's different types of risk. There's, I think, financial risk, there's technical risk, and then there's business and some other legal risk. So I think depending on what you're talking about, there could be multiple areas of risk. Those all have to be handled in the contract, but like I said earlier, I think as the contracts get smaller, the risk starts going away. If the larger the contract, the higher the risk. Okay, so for instance, it's a fairly, contracts have been fairly large in the past, and they've gone about huge amounts of data being moved to and from outsourcer, from buyer to seller. So how is that information backed up? How is it made sure that it's accurate on both ends, keeps up to date, and who owns that data at the end? All of that information has been put in the contracts. As those, what I've seen, as those contracts get smaller, those things don't get in the contracts because now it's not a commoditized product anymore. It may be handled, a lot of the contracts now are being handled by middle management rather than procurement and the lawyers at a high level. When there's large contracts, usually everybody gets involved. When they're smaller contracts, it might just be middle management or maybe even some higher management that get involved without the legalese and the different people that get involved. So I think there's more risk on some of these things, but again, I'm one of those people that the risk is up to the business to take. It shouldn't be up to IT to take. It shouldn't be up to the legal people to say no or yes. It should be up to the people that make the business decisions to say, okay, I realize there's a risk. Now, is that risk too much to outsource, or is it okay to outsource because of that risk? I know the risk is there. Now I just need to decide what I'm going to do with that risk. Hope that answered the question.
Excellent. Okay, we have another comment. I think that did. Another comment from Guy, which is maybe the opposite of a risk but a benefit. Companies, when they outsource, now have controlled costs. And then a couple of comments from Maureen around other risks that she sees, and maybe you want to comment on these. You know, risks to privacy and the risks to reputation as they move data around.
Okay. Well, if I understood the question right on benefits first, what kind of benefits are outsourcers seeing, or what kind of benefits the buyers of the outsourcing are seeing?
Yeah, I think the comment was that, you know, one of the benefits is they now have controlled costs.
Absolutely. And not only controlled costs, if you outsource properly, I think you're outsourcing maybe a service that's not a core competency to you. And when you outsource it, so let's say infrastructure, for instance, you're a small upstart company, and you don't have the capital, you don't want to hire all the people to build the right infrastructure. You might have to have virtualization capabilities. You might want to be putting something in the cloud. Somebody has to put all that together for you. Maybe that's something you outsource. Okay, well, the benefit of that outsourcing is all of that innovation. You shouldn't have to create and spend money not only on the people doing it, but the R&D to try and figure out what are all the best products out there. Okay, do I use Dell equipment now, or do I use something else? Do I use a cloud service for this, or do I build it in-house? All of those things, if you're outsourcing with the proper person and you've done your due diligence, the R&D should be on them. They figured out the best way to do it. They're the most effective at it. They should be able to do it at less cost and actually even better service. So I agree with that. The risks, you had a second part, the risks.
Yeah, just maybe a comment, if you would, on one of Maureen's observations or concerns maybe was the risk to privacy and I guess with privacy leaks potentially, the risk to the organization's reputation as data gets moved around.
Absolutely. I hope I'm not offending her too much by saying it's all about people, and it's not all about people, but I've had customers in the past with DoD contracts and such, and we were the outsourcer, and we had to have no copper touching, right? So we were on their network, even though it was our facility, but we could have no actual copper contact with any other networks. So to me, we still had all the capabilities of our people, but we kept all the data separate. And for some reason, that was okay based on DoD regulations. Now, a lot of people say, well, we can't outsource because your people are not employees. Well, you know, I don't really get that, because in person is in person, whether it's an employee or not. As soon as you're outsourcing it, there's usually penalties in place if data moves around or what have you. I mean, we'd fire people immediately if there was a security breach, just like they would, just like our buyer would, our customer. So to me, you handle everything exactly the same, and you handle it as per the rules. So whatever the rules are is what you have to handle it by. Hope that I'm not sure if that answered Maureen or not. It's just one of my pet peeves that people are very worried about when they move security outside of their walls, when I think it's not any different outside of their walls based on specific rules.
Right. So if you're contractually obligated and there are penalties and so on in place, then the security could just be as high as what you're saying.
Exactly.
Okay. Great. Another comment from Guy. It may be a benefit again. Hopefully the outsourcing organization can have improved SLAs so they can get back to their core competencies.
So the outsourcing organization has better SLAs because
once they've outsourced, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, once they've outsourced, so they can concentrate on their core processes.
Exactly.
Okay.
Their competencies, yeah.
Absolutely. And if you've outsourced to the right people. And again, if you're not looking at just costs, so if you're going, a lot of people, what they did in the 90s was outsource to offshore because it was cheap labor, and don't have anything against cheap labor as long as it's trained properly and has all the right knowledge and all the right tools and all that kind of good stuff. But if you're just focused on cheap labor, I think that's exactly what you're going to get, is cheap labor. If you're focused on the outcome of your outsourcing service, then you have a lot higher probability of getting what you want, which is maybe the R&D, maybe the expertise of that outsourcing organizations. So you can, and I think that's one of the reasons why companies now are having smaller contracts, so they don't have to spend as much time hounding the outsourcers for, okay, you're supposed to be making this SLA, you didn't, so we're going to charge you. The buyers they don't want to spend time doing that. They'd rather spend time getting new customers, retaining their customers, understanding their customers, and focusing on their core competencies, and that's the whole reason to outsource to begin with. If you have to complain and worry about your outsourcer, I think you have the wrong outsourcer, to put it bluntly.
Right. Yeah, very good. So taking a holistic approach then, outsourcing is maybe not such a bad word.
I agree, as long as it's done properly, as in most things. Okay?
Excellent.
Well, thank you.
One last comment I see here. Mark, great job today. And I would echo that sentiment. Been fantastic. I don't see any other questions. Mark, if you could just pop to the last slide.
Thank you.
That will bring up our contact information. Today's session has been recorded, so if you would like to share that with anyone, please go ahead. We'll send an email link out. When you exit, there's a quick survey. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Don't forget next week's exciting and dynamic speaker will be yours truly. So if you're interested in reducing call volumes, then please join us. And thank you everyone for your participation today. Really appreciate all the comments. It makes it much more interesting. And once again, thank you, Mark. A fantastic job.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Have a great day.